Hi, and welcome to episode 5 of Talent Acquisition Trends and Strategy. Today, we are joined by Yuri Kruman. Yuri, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks a lot for having me on, James. Pleasure to be here.
I'm looking forward to this conversation. And would you mind telling our listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you're working on right now?
Sure. So my business consists of several pieces. One is doing HR consulting for fast growth companies, mostly tech startups, but currently I'm actually working with a nonprofit in the telecom sector as well as a large investment manager. And a lot of my work, you can look at it as building strategic HR functions from scratch. Of course, the number one subject is talent acquisition. Here we are. But there are other pieces also: performance management, learning and development, awards and recognition, and really, also coaching. Coaching really is the glue that holds all these pieces together. You can have a brilliant project plan and everything set up budget-wise, but if people don't understand what the hell they're doing or why HR is important, it's not important. It's not enough to just say, hey, HR has a seat at the table. Rah, rah, rah. Okay, you got a budget, great. Who's driving the bus? Where are we going? How does this fit with the values of the company? Are things traveling consistently in terms of internal communication? So that's where everything starts. Actually, I would say that 80% of all problems start with poor communication.
I would agree. And I know you were telling me earlier that you're very passionate about learning and development and helping companies build out programs and playbooks so that they can go about implementing learning and development processes the right way. I was hoping if maybe we could just start off at a high level and you could tell us a little bit about why learning and development are so important, and get into maybe some of the most common mistakes that you're seeing when it comes to organizations, when it comes to learning and development. And then from there, we can kind of get into some tactical, actionable steps in terms of how leaders can start to implement some of these strategies as well.
Sure. Yeah. So let's start with higher level philosophy. So first of all, in my book, learning and development is something that, ideally you kind of think, well, I should have learned that in school, or I don't know, maybe the government should have subsidized. I mean, in a lot of countries, that's the way things work, maybe in Denmark, etc. But in the US, obviously, it's a little bit different picture. I think the government's not really interested in subsidizing things like that, not in any open or thorough or relevant way. And universities often teach skills that are really antiquated. We don't need to get into that, whether college is worth it or not. That's not this conversation. The point is, when you get to a point where kids come out of college or grad school and their skills, okay, maybe they're relevant in terms of specific subject matter. Okay, they've got an MBA or whatever. The problem is a lot of them, especially because of COVID, because we're working remotely, we don't have those water cooler conversations. Office politics are not playing out nearly in the same way as for people that have gotten used to working in the office in the past. So a lot of things like what we call soft skills or emotional intelligence are you're not learning these things on the job if the job doesn't really offer meaningful learning and development. And if you look at what we see out in the market, so most companies have something. They've got a system, they've got some compliance, they've got some, I don't know, random courses from Udemy and rah, 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 yeah, your high potential, your high performance. Okay, that sounds great. What does that mean? Like, I don't even know how it was chosen. Like, is that based on my performance? Is it based on someone picking a number out of a hat? Okay, all right, sure, I'll take that Udemy subscription. Thank you. And then 95% of those people never use the subscription. You got the 1, 2, 3 people that maybe use it a lot, but like, what do I do with this? Does this connect to my performance review? Do I get rewarded for this? Like, I mean, it's great that I have Udemy courses, but I kind of could pay for them myself, right? So learning and development, unfortunately, in most companies, even Fortune 500 companies, is, I'm just going to be blunt, it's piss poor. It's over-reliant on systems. It's over-reliant on knowledge that's not relevant. It's not connected in any way to performance. It's not, we don't really know what people find relevant. I mean, hell, we don't often connect what's in that LMS to How does this make the person's profile more valuable out in the market? Right. So these are not these are not difficult connections to make, but corporate, learning and development is unfortunately, for the most part, stuck in that kind of antiquated way of thinking. So with this in mind, I myself have worked in, 6 different industries. I've had completely different careers. I've worked in very early stage startups. I've worked in fast growth companies, both as an employee and a consultant. I've worked in very large Fortune 500 companies, financial services, and healthcare, and others. And I hate to say it, but as an employee, my learning and development was just, doing something I've never done. For whatever reason, that's been my career. I've talked my way into a lot of opportunities where I've probably had no business being. Okay, just as an example, walking into a startup with about 50 people, I was like number 45 to do finance and operations, basically off the street, which is insane. It was a crazy learning curve. I mean, I completely burned out after however many months. But you can call that learning and development, or you can call it hazing. I mean, I don't know, but that's not something structured. That's not something that sits with a program, has someone overseeing it, connected to any outcomes other than like sink or swim. So that's unfortunately the most common scenario. So coming in, just having been an end consumer of this, horror of what's called L&D, I looked and I said, okay, well, lots of self-help books out there. I've been a coach to different companies and leadership teams, and it's like a shot in the arm. Yes, vitamin B, awesome, right? That wears off. That's not enough. You have to really bake that into the way that HR works. You have to think about employee experience. Of course, you need it to scale, so you do have to think about systems. But the most fundamental layer is you've got to match market reality with what you need in the business, but also what people want and need. You have to ask, not just ask, fill this Google form, talk to people, actually have those conversations, interview them. Because those are, I found time and time again as a consultant, I'm coming in as an outsider. People open up to me. They'll never open up to the HR person because they're afraid. Is this going to, is this going to come back on me? Is this going to reflect poorly on me? Am I going to get fired for saying something wrong? So that's the way I look at L&D, right? There has to be some rhyme and reason for why we're doing this. Yes, there has to be a program. There have to be, quizzes, workshops, training, some way to measure whether someone is actually getting value from this. They're actually retaining something. And yes, you have to connect that to performance management, because if all your Udemy courses or whatever you put in doesn't really count, what are you doing it for? What is the point?
I have a feeling that those types of courses like the Udemy, I'm not saying that there isn't a place for it, but to me, it's at best it's like a cookie cutter approach to whatever you're learning. It's not necessarily going to be specific to the company's the nuanced environment that they're in, or their customers, or the value proposition that they're supposed to be bringing to the table for their client base. So I think, I mean, I guess I would suppose the heavy lift, right, is figuring out, okay, who really is going to own this internally.
Yep.
Not only like, okay, who's going to produce the content and the courses, or the PowerPoint, or whatever it is, like who's going to produce it, and who's going to kind of present it, and then how do we build process around doing this on a regular basis? Like, how much of it should be baked into kind of onboarding and then ongoing development.
Yep.
Is the biggest challenge that you see, I mean, just like speaking from my perspective in growth stage tech, is my assumption, which could very honestly be wrong, would be that the probably the biggest bottleneck is figuring out, okay, who's going to have the bandwidth to build out this training, because a cookie cutter external class probably isn't going to do the trick. At least if we really truly want to empower people and get the most value out of the opportunity of everyone working together and serving our customers, somebody's got to produce that. Somebody's got to own it. Somebody's got to implement it and track it. I mean, is it just like the biggest problem, like a bandwidth issue? And if so, how do you solve for that? I mean, how do you, who ultimately is going to own this on an ongoing basis?
So, of course, bandwidth is a critical issue. There's no question. But before we talk about bandwidth, I think there's a much more important conversation to be had. Number one is, okay, how do we know what people need, right? What do people benefit from? How does this help their career growth? How does this connect to their performance? And yeah, of course, business results. We can't just build this in a vacuum, right? So if we're training people, we're spending all this time and money and resources, especially pulling people out of their work, right, toward these sessions. You have to really make sure that this is truly valuable. And of course, if you ask people, hey, what will you benefit from? And the implicit question is, what's going to get you to stay, pretty please, right? Then you create a program partly based on that, but also you need to make sure, okay, mostly there are several really big gaps that most companies have. So one of them, and I found this again, this is not my research, this is not my finding, nothing original here. Management. New managers have a lot of problems because they never got taught what the hell it is to manage. Nobody ever said, hey, you're going from being an individual contributor to having your success based 80% maybe on the success of your team members. They've probably never done that. No one's born a coach, right? You need some practice. I mean, and not practice where you're doing it live because your poor reports. Guess what? If you suck at it, they're going to be gone, and they're not going to wait very long either. We see this time and time again in the current climate. And so you need to create a safe space, not to overuse that term, where new managers practice on themselves. Okay, how do I manage? How do I coach? How do I ask the right questions? How do I do it? Not because I'm answering the question, because I just want to listen, right? I want to understand better. How do I do that? And how do I do that? Partly through systems, because yeah, we need to survey people. How are you doing? How are you reacting to COVID? Do you have what you need to do your job? Do you understand what your role is, etc. Right? So you have to ask a lot of questions, but it's not just this kind of survey until you're nauseous.
Mhm.
Talking is the simplest way to find out what a person needs. Showing not just empathy, but something deeper. I want to know who you are. I want to know how I can help you, because you're here for 2 to 3 years at most. I know that my job as a manager is to make your life as good and easy as possible, so that you'll do your life's best work. You'll make me look good. Our incentives are aligned that way, right? But if you never say those words, your reports are just like, yes, boss. Whom does that serve? Nobody. So to go back to how to build a learning and development program, you have to start with that kind of, on the ground feedback. And unfortunately, sometimes the best way to get that feedback is by bringing in an outsider. I would say most of the time, because again, there are established dynamics. People are not willing to share things if leadership suddenly wakes up, oh crap, people are leaving, but they've been toxic the whole time. The people are not
Yeah.
going to open. There's no magic, open sesame.
How well do
So
you think? I was just gonna ask real quick. How well do you think like employee surveys work for these types of things? Like if you put out an employee engagement survey, and when part of that section was on learning and development, and do you feel like that is an appropriate? Is that going to get you the feedback you need, or you also need like that human element of somebody coming in and having the conversation so they can ask the right follow-up questions and understand the nuance and maybe get a little bit deeper?
let me give you a couple of practical examples. So
Mhm.
actually, two clients. I'm not going to name names, obviously. One, I was just a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed CHRO, my first role as a head of HR. I'm coming into a company with about 120 staff. Okay. And I'm coming in again. I'm very I have my Fortune 500, I have my startup stuff. This is a home health company. No one's ever worked in any Fortune 500 company. No one's ever worked in a startup. So there's not a great deal of sophistication, right? Around these things are, what the hell is HR? Like, okay, it's probably compliance because we're in healthcare. Like benefits, no, guys, sorry. This is a lot more interesting. I send out my first employee engagement survey, and of course, crickets. I'm like, okay, I can't. Like, I can't just wait for maybe things to trickle in. I just went out on the floor and said, hey, I'm Yuri. I'm the head of HR. I'm here to help make your life easier. Tell me what's on your mind. Talk to me, okay? Let me just understand that I'm the chief employee advocate. I'm here to really make your life better. Like slowly, like, okay, all right, okay, well, fresh face. Like, I changed the menu in the kitchen. Like, oh wow, I got us Trader Joe's. Like, it's silly stuff. So next day, I'm going around to another part of the office. I talked to one girl. I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm Yuri, head of HR. Like, have you taken the survey? She's like, no, I mean, like, I see she's not trusting. Like, something's looking. Like, it's totally anonymous, right? Like, look, come with me. I'm going to show you. Come to my office. I'm going to show you on my screen in the back end what it looks like. It is totally anonymous. Look, you see? She broke down crying. The girl broke down crying. She couldn't believe it's actually anonymous. I'm like, okay, this company has some massive trust issues. Okay, so it's maybe an extreme, but another client that I've worked with more recently, I'm coming in, I'm looking at those, scores. Oh, everyone loves this company. It's 4.4, 4.6. Like, I'm skeptical. Like, I don't know. So I interview, there's something like, I don't know, 13, 14 people on the leadership team, whatever. And I talk to them one after another, and all these things keep dropping. And like, okay, this isn't all right. This isn't all right. The big boss says this, someone else says that. Things are not really moving. People don't understand what the hell these department names mean. The onboarding is not okay. So what's going on here, right? Survey bias, very simple. Survey bias means, you might have a couple disgruntled people out the door tomorrow. Yeah, they might let it rip, but it's way out of proportion. You have everybody else, oh, great, awesome, thanks. Yeah, not helpful. So to answer your question in a very long way, you got to talk to people, and you usually have to come from a place of, I'm here to serve you. Okay, here's how I'm going to help you. Now, give me the ugly stuff. I know the good stuff. I've seen the survey results, but tell me what's really bothering you. And again, this is completely anonymous. It's not going to be connected to you in any way. This is going to go up in an audit report to the leadership team. They will hear the message loud and clear because they don't know where it's coming from. And I have the percentages of people that mention this subject. That's a punch to the face. Suddenly the leadership is, whoa, wait a minute. Okay, this is a real problem. Okay, that's how I make sure the information is packaged in a way that's much more potent. And it becomes a business case, it becomes a project plan, it becomes something that gets implemented.
Yeah, that's very helpful. A lot of value there. I think a lot of our clients are in a place where they're trying to find that right balance between making systems work at scale, and there's to some extent that appeal of going a survey route because it's like a process you can implement and it's almost in a sense easier, but what's the point in doing it if you're not going to follow up with a human element to actually get the buy-in and trust from the team to get the information that's actually going to help make the organization better. And just to kind of circle back on kind of closing the subject of learning and development was, it sounds like what you're saying is that there's learning and development really comes down to achieving two outcomes. And one would be just retention and employee experience, right? Like focusing on how can we create a great culture and great environment for people here where they can feel like they're learning and developing and progressing in their career. And then two, like the performance element, how can we help them get to a point where they can add as much value as possible for whatever function or outcome they're expected to produce for the organization and for potentially for clients. Is that like an accurate kind of summary, like those two kind of pillars of what you should be thinking about when building a learning and development program?
I think, of course, you have to justify an L&D program with ROI, like anything else, right? You have to have clear, smart goals, all that good stuff. But I think it's very important to mention context, right? So if you're building just something and you're thinking ROI, 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 okay, yeah, I mean, you might get some limited ROI from some kind of, courses and trainings and all that. But again, if you're not connecting it to the bigger picture, if you're not really serving the employees, if it's something that's built out of context, it's not really, relevant to make the market value of your employees greater. If they're not feeling that kind of actual care, they'll, of course, I mean, they either will not pay attention, they're not going to participate. We know that 97% of courses are never finished. Okay, so if you're doing it in a half-assed way, if you're just kind of putting a tech stack together and then like, hey, why don't you work on this HR person? You're going to get a half-assed result. So you have to zoom out and say, okay, you know what? Yes, we're not all Richard Branson, and there's a famous quote that you gotta basically train people well so they can leave, but basically make their life so good that they don't want to. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but you have to understand that your four walls, your company, are just that. They're four walls, and the value, I would say, the lifetime value of a happy employee does not stop at their end of tenure, right? Because they become an ambassador for your brand. They can come back later after going to learn somewhere else. So actually, I would argue that you got to push the walls out, right? You got to think of the employee experience as something much longer term than, oh, well, someone just got in the door. No, actually, it starts long before with the candidate experience. How do people look at your company and product, and what is their perception of it? Do they want to be associated with that, right? So, and then all the way out to, okay, this person went for 2 years to work at a competitor. Now they're bringing all that incredible, network, learning experience, et cetera, to make things much better now for us. So learning and development is yes, it's a long-term game. Yes, the ROI is not always limited to, hey, can you test better on this quiz, or can you do project management better tomorrow? It's a longer-term play. That's my philosophy of L&D. I believe that's the right way to do it, and there's a reason why my version of L&D is much more comprehensive. It's not just touching upon the favorites. Yes, time management, be more mindful, expectation management, negotiation, deal making, managing up and down. All those things are great, but you got to start with the foundation, health. Okay, you have to think about mental models. What's going on in there? What are the cognitive biases a person has against him or herself? You have to teach people, again, who are never taught in college, maybe, how to manage your finances, how to manage your career. Maybe you've got a side hustle. Let's use that. Let's not say, oh my God, no, side hustle, that's it, you're out. Right? So those things plus classical coaching, okay, how do you negotiate? Yes, how do you win a business deal? How do you manage up or down? How do you deal with family members? How do you gain emotional intelligence? Yeah, classic stuff. And then bigger picture. Okay, what's your conversation? All of this is conversation, language and psychology. That's my focus. That's for me the key to behavioral change. The last conversation is what's your, how do you, I don't know, talk to God or the universe, or what do you see as the meaning of life? Things have to connect. Learning and development is not done in a vacuum. It's not just a skill-based thing. It's a lifelong thing.
Agreed. And I really like the perspective of looking at it through the lens of employee experience. I really do think this is obviously an oversimplification, but for me, the way that I look at building my company is just, if I had to boil it down, it's just about creating great experiences. I have to find ways to create great experiences for my employees. I have to find ways to create great experiences for my clients. And if I just look through every process, everything that I do is through the lens of how can I create an incredible experience, right? And that's obviously, it's very difficult to figure out how to do that at scale. And that's the puzzle, right? But that really is, to me, like kind of what it boils down to. And again, as you said, looking at things holistically, looking at when it comes to employee journey or contractor journey or anything else, like well before they start and well after they leave, a lot of I would say that your thought process is very much so aligned with other industry leaders, thought leaders that I am speaking to. It's kind of interesting. It's like a common thread. The higher up you go in terms of experience that individuals have that are in a similar space to your own, there is, I think, with a lot of the top people, people are pretty much aligned that yes, you can't just, this isn't just like a box you're checking, or this isn't just, you can't be as limited in scope. You have to think about the experiences you're creating for individuals before they join your organization and after they leave. And it's all going to come back, right? So that's incredibly helpful. And I wanted to, I know we're coming up on time here shortly, so I wanted to touch on performance management. And specifically, I would love to get your pulse on, okay, let's say that organizations are getting to the point where they're starting to scale very rapidly, and performance management really isn't centralized. Maybe it's just done more so on a function level, right? Just through specific managers. I mean, how do you go about bringing consistency to performance management, making sure that it's in line with the culture that you want to build, making sure that it's aligned with creating great experiences for employees, and kind of tied into learning and development. I mean, what recommendations do you have for companies that are right now, and leaders that are right now starting to think about being a little bit more structured when it comes to performance management?
Yeah, so you stepped into a hive of bees, my friend. But let's go. Let's go.
Let's do it.
So the first thing I always look at is philosophy, right? Again, if it's just one more set of tasks for those poor managers who are not trained, and they're overstretched, and it's oh my god, another 360 cycle. This is hell. And I get this feedback. It's like you're going to get a lot of pushback that I don't know. My 15-5 thing is just like I don't have time for this. It's end of quarter. It's end of year. Ah. Okay, so before we talk about that, right? Managers, whoever's giving the performance reviews, and actually really everyone in the ecosystem, if you're doing 360s, has to understand from a bigger picture level how it serves them. What is it teaching them? How is it helping them, right? It's the same principle with Glassdoor, for example, right? If you want to know the salary ranges, you got to contribute your own, right? So you're part of a community. You're part of something much bigger than yourself. Okay, so kumbaya, great. How's this serving my career? Well, guess what? Part of the 360 process is you give some, you get some. If you're learning, if you're early in your career, maybe you haven't managed anyone, take feedback, but also read between the lines because the feedback is not always detailed. The second piece is make sure the feedback is a lot more frequent, and the frequent feedback should live somewhere. There has to be some tracker for, okay, hey, you just presented, you did this well, but you could work on this. So come back to me in, I don't know, 2 weeks, 4 weeks. Show me that you've improved. Do the next presentation. Where does that live? It's not by the water cooler, right? It's got to live in a system. I don't know if it's your culture app, your lattice, 15.5, something, right? So you have to have that ongoing conversation. But the conversation isn't just over Zoom and it gets lost and it gets forgotten. Everyone's busy. So you have to think, how can we scale this conversation between each manager and each report? And it can't just be obviously once a year. I think most people are well beyond that nonsense at this point. So maybe you run 2 full cycles of performance reviews every year, maybe beginning at 6 months. Maybe you do 2 shorter cycles in between, so you have every 3 months. And then you have that tracker somewhere. Again, it could be a Slack thread. Maybe it's connected somehow to the culture app. I mean, all these APIs exist. This is not new. And the other thing is you have to think about, okay, well, how does, let's say, this performance review connect to a promotion cycle or higher pay or, rewards and recognition? All these things have to be standardized. It can't just be ad hoc, like, oh crap, it's Christmas. Oh, here's your Amazon gift card. Here's your bonus. These things don't work. People see right through it. It's not genuine. See you later. Okay. So you have to think about this beforehand and don't just pull it out of your ear. Ask people. There's something I use called the user's guide to self. Very simple. It's a Google form, but it's very informative. Ask people questions like, okay, what's your preferred communication style? How do you want to be rewarded and recognized? What are your areas for development? Right? What do you want other people to know about you? Because, hey, you're a human. You probably have some kind of, interesting background, where you came from or where you studied or where you worked, right? People want to know these things, but because, well, he's not doing it, why should I do it? Like, well, the boss doesn't open up. Why the hell should I open up? Right? So it's because no one else is doing it. We get into this group think of like, oh, I'll just everything is great. That doesn't serve anybody. When you ask people questions and you have the manager go first to say, hey, I'm also a human. I've also got kids. I've got a dog barking in my Zoom background. Sorry about that. But you don't have to apologize. Just like state it up front. Treat people like adults, right? And that's how you start creating some kind of meaningful, yes, performance management and rewards and recognition. Things are working. You're tracking things and you're having that conversation. That's the key piece. Everything comes down to a conversation. You have to actually give a damn.
I agree. And I want to be respectful of your time too. I know we had discussed stopping at 2:45 Eastern, but do you have a few minutes to go over, or do you need to jump, Yuri, just so I know?
Let me just double check, but I think
Yeah.
I should be okay. Here, come on. Yeah, I can go to. I have another 15 minutes. Totally
Okay,
fine.
cool. So we could kind of jump into coaching, and then I'd love
Yeah.
to learn a little bit more about your book, and we can kind of wrap up from there. So, yeah. So one of the third topic that we discussed jumping into today was coaching. And I know that's something that you're very passionate about. So talk to us a little bit about that. I would love to just hear your thoughts on how organizations can implement coaching structure.
Okay, so I think most people at a certain level are well aware that, okay, just as Olympians all have coaches, right? All the top performers have coaches. So what's so special about coaching, right? Okay, I mean, we talk about some basic themes. You have accountability, you have structure, you have, somebody just to go with you, right? To go with you on the journey. So as a CEO, for example, I mean, it's really lonely. And okay, maybe you talk to some other entrepreneurs, but you don't usually share. It's not that open. It's like, okay, a coach is someone who usually has been through very similar things. Otherwise, where are you aligning? Has usually built something similar to what you have, has ideally, similar values as well. It doesn't have to be exactly the same background, but there has to be some sense of this person gets me, this person knows what I'm going through, and this person has already been at least 2, 3 steps ahead of me so that they can help me think through what I'm going through now and how to plan for the future. So, a coach does not, it's not about maybe having the craziest coaching certification or having gone through Harvard and Stanford. I mean, maybe that's your background, maybe that's the coach you want. God bless. But it's really just someone who is able to give you a different picture from what you see because you're too close to your own stuff. Right? The same way that a cobbler has the worst shoes, the coach says, "Hey, you know what? Look at your damn shoes. That's disgusting. Get a new pair. Get them polished. Enough of this." Yes, coach. Right. So you have that accountability. So when you have your call, maybe you're scrambling last minute to, go through items 1 through 5. I mean, I do this myself with my coach. There's something to be said about just, okay, there's a regular check-in. I do have to really push through things that I'm not comfortable with or address things that maybe I've, ignored. So with that in mind, I believe, and it's not just my philosophy, I believe every person, every employee should have some kind of coach, not a mentor. A mentor is like, hey, oh yeah, sure, we went to Penn together. Oh, that's great. That's awesome. Yeah, let's check in 6 months. Good luck. Who the hell needs that? That's not useful.
It's like a pep talk. Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah,
hear
so
you.
that's mentoring. So coaching is structured. There's a timeline. There's certain goals. A person can relate to you and kick your ass when you need because that's the whole point.
Well, so I agree with this philosophy a lot. So when I started Secure Vision, I think it was like the first 2 years I started the company. I actually paid advisors and coaches, if you will, more than I was paying myself. And it was really because I came into a situation in which I think in our first year of business, or maybe it was first year and a half, we ended up closing around $600,000 in revenue. And I had to go out and hire people. I had no management experience. So I had to figure out, okay, I went from, you know, being basically a salesperson to, okay, now I got a team of like 10 people pretty quickly. And, I've never done this before. So I don't, I don't want to mess this up too bad. So investing in coaching, or particularly in the early days, was incredibly helpful. And it starts to, if you have a great coach too, it's all psychology, and it helps. I mean, you're going to become more aligned with their way of thinking, and you can get to the point, I think, where when you enter a situation, you can start to kind of hear their voice in terms of like, okay, this is what this is my go-to reaction, but this is also, I'm kind of hearing this other voice. It's what we're doing right now at my company is we're trying to roll out executive coaching for new managers that are stepping up into leadership roles. And the way that we're kind of structuring it is, look, it doesn't, yes, like there's going to be a lot of work situations that you need help with. But also, if there's something else that's going on, even in your personal life or whatever else, like the whole philosophy toward business is we want Secure Vision to be a place where you can get the most out of life, personally and professionally. So when it comes to the coaching, it's like whatever's going to help you get the most out of life. It doesn't have to be on, hey, I had this conversation with a team member last week. How do I respond? Like, of course it can be tactical stuff like that, and that's important, but we try to just kind of leave it open to where people can kind of take their own path and focus on developing in the areas that they feel is going to be the highest leverage for themselves. Does that make sense? And I would love to get to the point where I could offer a coach to everybody. I think, I don't know, that's it. Unless there's a resource I'm not aware of, I think that'd be pretty expensive. So that's, I guess, the one bottleneck in terms of how often and to how many people we're able to offer coaching services to at this point in time. But I don't know, are you familiar with any resources to help kind of open that up and give people more access to coaching?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different platforms. You have Muse where, I don't know, a person can just go out and find their own coach. Maybe you subsidize them. Marlowe, Bravely, I mean, Go Coach. I've been on a lot of these myself as a coach.
Okay.
But just maybe offer a little bit different way. You've seen Billions probably, right? There's this Wendy character. Wendy's expensive, but guess what? She's one person, and that's her sole focus, right? She's not running after HR processes. She's just strictly there to take care of people's psychology, make sure that they remain A players. And there's something to be said for that, right? Because you can hire 1,000 coaches for your 1,000 employees. That's a pretty penny. That's not sustainable.
Right.
But sometimes you have that one resource that maybe you buy a bunch of hours and you kind of create that pool for at least certain populations, and you grow that over time. And then you also, the key piece, even more importantly, you have to teach your managers to become coaches. That's the more important strategic play. You have to teach people in your company to be great coaches.
Yeah.
That's the way you retain the value.
That's hard. And that's actually, I mean, that's an area that I think is something I'm giving a lot of thought to right now. It's like, how do you really teach new managers? I mean, I think at this point, it's like a lot of what we're trying is like very situational, right? Like, hey, talk to me about this. Like, but how do you kind of help people kind of avoid falling in some of the holes that maybe, like, for instance, that I did my first, year as a manager, right? And how do you help people kind of get to a higher level of competency sooner? And I think the coaching aspect is critical to do that, right? Like you need somebody that you can kind of talk to about these things and just focus on development. I definitely see the value there.
You can look at it in one of two ways, or maybe both. So you have the learning and development layer, meaning, again, one very practical example. So when I build an L&D program, one of my clients, for example, there's L&D for everybody. So suddenly the CEO just announced, hey, you know what? Every single employee is going to have to do 40 hours a year of learning and development. Okay, so we build out the program. Everyone has that basal layer. Managers have a separate program, meaning they have certain skills that they need to catch up on. They need to do that role playing. They need to learn how to coach. They need to learn kind of that mind shift between I'm an individual contributor and now 80% of my success is my team success. Okay. Now you need to think, okay, what might be, maybe coaching is partly venting. It's just saying, you know what, okay, now, like you got that out of your system. Now let's focus on your personal and professional development plan, something more than just a couple pages. Okay, how are you doing with regard to your reading list? What about creating content, working on your employee brand, right? And empowering your team through coaching. How are you doing with that? So it's kind of like coaching people to be coaches.
Sure.
And,
that makes a lot of sense.
That fits together really neatly, and you have different ways for people to channel their energy, and again, to circulate information, to circulate value in the right direction. That's what you want to think about.
I like what you said too, just about like the venting aspect too, just like kind of giving people a chance to kind of get it out of their system. Like, okay, get that out of the way. So now it's like, so what are we going to do about it now? Like, what are the actionable things that we can put in place together on this call? And I think a lot of times too, once people have that opportunity, they can kind of figure out the answers. Like, they just some structure to like working through the problem.
Yep.
And they can usually come up with their own answers. So yeah, I could talk about coaching with you all day. I mean, it's something I'm passionate about as well. But we are coming up on time, and I wanted to hear a little bit about the book that you have coming out next month.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Great conversation. I really appreciate this. Not many podcasts go kind of deeper into this subject, so I definitely appreciate that. So about the book. The book is called Be Your Own Commander in Chief. As I mentioned, I'm all about language and psychology. For me, that's the key to behavioral change. So I'm trying to create a roadmap here, not a roadmap, over the course of years per se, starting with each day. And if we're talking about conversations as the key to that behavioral change, language and psychology are two sides of the same coin. It's your external versus internal language. So what are the four conversations that I delve into? Number one is looking at your conversation with your body, because most people don't think of it that way. It's just like, hey, okay, like I eat well, I exercise, that's fine. No, but what's your feedback? What feedback are you getting from your body about what's working and what's not? So it's getting a little bit toward personalized medicine without all the biohacking and all that stuff. But just saying 80-20, okay? I'm not LeBron James. I don't have $1 million a year to spend on my body. God bless LeBron, nothing against that. But okay, how can I set up my physical health, looking at sleep, biorhythms, yes, fitness, nutrition, prevention, things of that nature, so that I can regularly enter a higher cognitive state in order to do my life's best work. It's that simple. Okay. Number two, mental models and life skills. So when I look inside my mind and I really think about, okay, my worldview, what makes that up? Where I'm from, how I grew up, my culture, my language. Okay, what about my cognitive biases, right? Most intelligent people have, I don't know, imposter syndrome, Dunning-Kruger. I mean, more than 150 different cognitive biases they may or may not be aware of. So what are they? Where do they live? What do they sound like? We all have that little internal Twitter. Hey, you didn't go to Harvard Business School, you suck. Come on, man. What is that? That's just my amygdala. That's just stress. Who cares? Who gives a damn about Harvard Business School, right? So you have to address what's in there. You also have to think about practical subjects. Okay, how do I manage expectations, manage my stress, manage, decision making? How do I do that from a place of core values? Oh yeah, I'm managing finances, my career, my side hustle. That's a lot of stuff. Okay, but that all has to live there. You have to put things in the right places and make sure you're going from a set of, a set of values that's foundational. Number three is that classical coaching stuff. All right, negotiation, deal making, managing up and down, maybe an interview. Oh yeah, those pesky family members like my wife, my kids, my parents. How do I deal with them? They're very difficult people. Okay. And then the last one is you've got to put everything in perspective. So, okay, I've got all that stuff. I've got it all aligned. Beautiful, awesome. Why? What's my why? And it's a conversation with God or the universe, maybe something toward a meaning of life, maybe something about rituals and traditions and really the deeper parts of life that are so critical to everything we do. And if you think about these four conversations as going up a mountain, it's kind of like a more elaborate Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Once you get to the top of the mountain, it's not, oh, kumbaya, now I know everything, I'm pure and whole. No, far from it. You know the path. And now you can go back and check in with each of those pieces every single day. You can ask yourself, where am I holding? Maybe if you have a coach, you can help for that conversation to be more meaningful and thoughtful. But really, there are four things I'm trying to roadmap with this book. Number one is to gain clarity. Who am I? Where am I going? How do I get there? Is the last question of the three. People mix that up. Number two is how do I find meaning? Okay, so meaning for me might be totally different from that of somebody else. Number three is once I've got those two, how do I create positive impact in the world? And number four, the thing everybody wants first, success. No, success is a byproduct of doing things the right way, with clarity, with meaning, and with impact. So that's what the book is about.
That sounds right up my alley. I'm really excited to read it.
It took a lot, a lot of divine inspiration, a lot of perspiration as well. I'm really excited that it's finally coming out in hardcover. It's actually 4 books, believe it or not just 4.
Nice. Well, yeah, I'm going to check it out. And maybe we could do this again one day in 3, 6 months from now, and maybe have a conversation more so centered around psychology. Because I think we could have a lot of fun chatting through that. But we unfortunately coming up on time. I know you have another engagement coming up too. So I think we're going to conclude here. I guess the last question real quick is where can people find you? Where can they follow you online?
Sure. Okay, so I'm all over the place. LinkedIn, you can go to my website directly, yurikruman.com, YURIKRUMAN.com. The book is on Amazon, or at least the hardcover will be out on May 12th. The Kindle's already out. And just feel free to reach out, Yuri at yurikruman.com.
Great, great. Well, thank you, Yuri. We appreciate you being here, and for everybody tuning in, thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much, James. It's a pleasure. Cheers.